is a momentous occasion as we welcome Mr. Gary C. Laney, a best-selling author and a serial entrepreneur, whose new book titled Become a Super Leader has been launched today. Is from United States of America to deliver the inaugural keynote address. Mr. Laney will enlighten us on leaders are made, not born, strategic competencies for the 21st century leaders. Please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Mr. Gary C. Laney.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen so the technical person can help me because it worked before. Let's see if we can get it to that point. Thank you so much. So if you can tell me if you can see my screen okay before I proceed, is it okay?
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dr. Ray, Dr. Patra, Charmaine, Dr. Gangan, I should call you. So I appreciate it. So it's so amazing to be able to be on a webinar like this where we're across the world. And I'm going to go ahead and expand my screen, and hopefully you can still see me at the same time. In talking to Charmaine, we were looking for a title for my speech, and it's an honor, number one, to be back with you, to be participating, to be involved with you, and to be amongst the thought leadership of entrepreneurship. I grew up in a family that was entrepreneurial. My father was an entrepreneur. My grandfather, my great-grandfather. It's in the blood, and so I knew when I got into corporate years and years ago that after 25 years that I would probably not be in it forever. And so 20 years ago, I'm dating myself. Don't add the numbers, okay? Because I'm the only gray-haired guy on this platform, I think. But for almost 20 years now, I've been in my own entrepreneurial venture. Been involved in 20 businesses, one of which. At the beginning, I was working for a company that was a startup that went public. I was a vice president of sales, worldwide sales. Wonderful opportunity to see how that all worked. Since then, getting involved in turnaround situations, helping entrepreneurs. 12 of the 20 were businesses that I acquired that built, grew, and developed into something I could then exit from. So really, really love entrepreneurship. It's near and dear to my heart. And so I thought I would just take a moment, first of all, to thank Charmaine. Thank you so much. Number one, for our friendship, for the years we've known each other. Thank you for creating this platform that allows people across the world, across the globe to be able to share best practices, thought leadership. And by the way, the title that I came up with, I wanted to represent the vast majority of all those who are participating today. So leaders are made, not born. If you've not heard that title before, it was coined by a man named Vince Lombardi, who was a great football coach years and years ago. So that's something that became part of my book. I'm going to share with you just a second, and then strategic competencies for the 21st century leader. So why is that important? Why do we care about trying to keep up with the Joneses, as you might say, within competitive leadership? And especially across the globe, and it's because everywhere I go, everywhere I speak, there's an array of people from ages in their 20s up to their 70s, and so the ideas, the formal thought leadership that's evolving, the technology, innovation. There's so much going on, and we can't just look at one period of time and say that's it. I grew up in technology. That's where I spent most of my career when I was in corporate. And I was in information technology, document management, knowledge management. I mean, it was all about data, all about how to share data, how to be collaborative. So in my experience, the fact that we're coming together in a variety of generations, number one. Number two, ideas that are formulating for innovation that are very important to us. The speed of technology today, of learning, of transformation, and of dissemination is so important. So I just wanted to give that introduction as we get started, and hopefully that will give some premise for it. So I'm so happy and delighted today. I have to say this because, and thank you so much for the introduction about my book. This book just became live today on all the Amazon channels across the world. And it is a kind of a sequel to my first book called The Power of Strategic Influence, if you've read that book. If you know me, you know that I interview top-notch leaders across the world. And I include them in my book as exemplary people, leaders that can tell you, from their experience that these principles work. And so you might notice some of them, and these are US-based people this time. Last time I had many more speakers, and it was more diversified across the world. But Nando Cesaron is the Executive Vice President and President of UPS US. He has been the president of UPS in many countries around the world. Now he's in an executive team within UPS. So if you haven't heard of UPS, they deliver and ship products across the world. I had the privilege and honor to go to headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, to interview him in person on April 5th coming up. I'm the organizer for an event called the Influential Leadership Symposium. It's not a 2-day conference like yours, it's a half day. But Nando has given me the opportunity to do a sit down and interview him live in front of this crowd. And that's a distinct honor that I'm looking forward to. Cindy Bigelow is the president of and CEO of Bigelow Tea. I don't know if you folks have heard of Bigelow Tea, but in the United States, they own 26% of the world of the market here. They also have their product throughout the world. So very, very popular. It's a family-owned business, and she was a classmate of mine at Northwestern Kellogg. David Meltzer, international speaking star. He was the CEO of a company called Lee Steinberg sports agency back in the day. If you've ever heard of the movie called Jerry Maguire, the company he worked for, and when he was there, that's what inspired this movie, because they used to represent all the very, very top-notch quarterbacks in the NFL. Jody Richards, I was introduced to. She's the CEO and president of Process Technology, and anywhere where there are microchips and technology that her company would be involved in. So I just wanted to give you a sampling of the people involved in my book. And becoming a super leader is all about reaching your potential and mastering things that'll let you to leave a legacy someday. So I thought I would start off. Go ahead. Does somebody have feedback? No? Okay. I'll continue. So I'm going to ask the question of those who are listening to me today, because we can't have this interchange that I normally have when I have a discussion or a speech in person. But the question I have for you is, have you ever been in the presence of someone of significance? I want you to think about what that means for a second. What does it mean to be in the presence of someone who has accomplished something to the extent where they might be considered to be an expert? Someone who, here in the States, and maybe this is a worldwide concept, but we call these kind of people GOATs, the greatest of all time. So think about if you've ever met someone like that. If you've ever been in their presence. And more importantly,
Hello.
I think somebody's trying to make contact.
We'll request delegates to please keep their mics on mute while we have the speaker. Terribly sorry about that, Gary. Please do carry on.
No, I just want to make sure there wasn't a problem. So take a moment and take a breather. So the question is, have you ever been in the presence of someone that is the best of the best? The next question is, if that ever happened to you, were you inspired? Did it make an impact on you? Do you remember how it felt? Were you inspired by the words, by their performance? It doesn't have to be about business. It could be in art or music or sports. But certainly the privilege of being in the presence of somebody like that has spent so much time of their life dedicated to developing something that is masterful. And then if you have done that, the biggest question is, did you do something with that inspiration that you received when you were in their presence? Think about the opportunity. You're sitting, you're watching, you're observing, and you experience what happens when someone of expert ability performs in front of you, and you think, wow, that was an amazing experience. But you don't want that to let that pass you by. If you let it pass you by, then it was an opportunity lost. So my proposal today, as I continue on this journey of discussing mastery and greatness and potential, is to ask yourself, how do I take advantage of the opportunities when I'm in the presence of someone that's really good at something, somebody who's masterful, that has significant skill set in something? And how do I put that to use so that I can make myself better and do something with it? So let's continue. You won't recognize this person, but you'll have heard of him. His name is Aristotle. Aristotle was an amazing person who was a philosopher who was taught and mentored by Plato, Plato was mentored by Socrates. So the three probably most known, I think, philosophers in the world that made a big difference in the things and the way they thought about back then, and their philosophies still continue today. When we talk about mastery, I love one of the sayings by Aristotle, who talked about if you're going to reach potential, it really just means that you have to find a way to make it actual. How do you take philosophy? How do you take an idea, theory, and turn it into something that actually produces a result? That means you have to take action. So nothing is really going to happen until you have action and a plan and execution. And he used to call it unrealized ability. So I'm going backwards a little bit. I'm dating myself, but there was a movie called City Slickers back in the day. It was a Western kind of movie, kind of modern Western, where people that got tired of business, got stressed out, needed a break from their jobs, would go to a ranch. And a ranch, they would put them to work, herding cattle, doing hard work, trying to kind of making them take notice of what real life is about, how to get them grounded before they go back to work. So they spent a week or two doing this. And one of the actors in this was a guy named Jack Palance, who played a person named Curly. And he was talking to a guy named Billy Crystal, an actor. And the question was, do you know what the secret of life is? And of course, Mitch said, no, I don't. But what is it? He said, there's just one thing, just one thing. And of course, Mitch wanted to know what that one thing was. And so he said, that's what you've got to figure out. So he didn't really answer the question, but he did give him the forethought to say, if you need to figure out what life is, you need to sit down, analyze, and figure out, what motivates you, what the meaning of life is to you, what the purpose is for the different roles you have in your life. So I've always remembered that in that movie, and we'll come back to that. So every one of us has the potential to do something and to become much more than we are. I've learned that. I've managed over 2,000 salespeople, support people, professional service people in my lifetime. I've been involved in 20 different businesses, and I've seen certain people extend themselves and reach the potential that they have by doing certain things on a regular basis to form habits. Well, Robert Greene, who talks about mastery in his teachings, said if you want to become a master of something, if you want to reach your potential someday, you have to do like Curly did and say, find that one thing that truly excites and motivates you, then devote yourself to it fully. That's really the key here. So I want you to think about that as we go through this. Next question is, do you have to be, like I said in my title, do you have to be born with talent to be successful? Again, the title, Leaders Are Made, Not Born. The three people up here you might recognize, Tiger Woods on the left, Amelia Earhart, and anybody recognize the guy on the right? That is not Mozart. That is Beethoven. So I just want to clear the field here so you know who we're looking at. Any of them, do you think, were prodigies? Do you think Tiger, Amelia, or Beethoven were prodigies? Which means at a very young age, they showed amazing talent and expertise and a very fast learning curve. Well, you might be surprised to find out the only one on that list who was a prodigy was Tiger Woods, who at the age of 8 or 9 years old wanted to enter a national contest to compete against 12 and 13-year-olds, and he won the national. He had to enter himself as a 12-year-old. He won the tournament and then went on to win every national tournament for years to come, and we all know what his experience was. The fact of the matter is, though, even prodigies can't reach their potential if they don't actually do what Aristotle did and say, put it to use, put it to work, make it actual, execute against it. Amelia Earhart didn't start flying until she was in her 20s, and so she wouldn't be considered a prodigy, even though she became the greatest woman aviator of all time at that time. And Beethoven was not considered to be a person with great talent at a young age, not even in his teenage years. Mozart would not see him, and Beethoven desperately wanted to meet Mozart and learn the skills. But through practice, through diligence and relentless hours of learning music and learning how to compose, even when he was losing his hearing, he became one of the greats. Some people think that he's greater than even Mozart, who was a prodigy. So I'm going to give you a case study, and I'm using examples from my world, and I'm using Benjamin Franklin here. Benjamin Franklin, if we had time, I could tell you about his life. I've been studying him for years and years. He was an amazing polymath. A polymath, if it's a term you're not familiar with, is a person that has multidisciplinary expertise. They don't just have expertise in one thing. It's many, many disciplines and knowledge throughout all those disciplines. Well, he was, as a young boy, put into an apprenticeship with his brother to learn the printing business. And then at age 17, he got on a ship, went to London, learned the publishing printing business in a much deeper manner, came back when he was age 20. And at that point in his life, does anybody know how long this man lived? In the 1700s, he was born in 1706. And when he was 20 years old, it was 1726. People were living to be about 39 years old. That's how the average age limit was for people to survive and live at that time. Benjamin Franklin lived to be 86 years old. How in the world did he do that when people weren't surviving so long? Well, I've been studying him for a long time. You can see the many accomplishments he had. He was a fantastic, very successful printer, author, and publisher. Actually retired at age 42. That was actually already past the age that most people lived back then, but he was only halfway through his age. He was a statesman. He was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence for the US. Benjamin Franklin was relentless in his seeking of information and ways of doing things. When he was age 20, his one thing was to decide for himself, because he had behaviors he didn't like about himself, was to say, I'm going to master my character. It wasn't just one thing. It's something for someone to become the best of the best in one thing. But he said, I want to be the best of the best in many things. And that category is called character. So he came up with 13 virtues, he called them. The virtues were temperance, silence, order, frugality. You can see the list there. These were things he was challenged with personally. They weren't just things he wanted to brag about. He really was challenged behaviorally by these items on the list here. And so he decided at age 20, once he returned from London, that he was going to work on these and create a system that would allow him over time to improve, if not master, all 13 of them. The big question we have is, why 13? I like 10 personally. I like, Big 10 lists. So did David Letterman, if you ever watched his show. But there was a reason why Benjamin Franklin, who was trying to be systematic about this, who was trying to make a commitment for life, chose 13. Ask yourself why for a second. Well, how many weeks are there in a year? 52. How many times does 13 go into 52? It goes in
4 times.
Exactly 4 times. Exactly. So he made a commitment with a program that said, this is perpetual. I'm going to start working on these items one at a time. I'm going to spend an entire week focusing on temperance, and then I'll go to the next one. I'll spend an entire week working on silence, order, resolution, frugality. At the end of those 13 weeks, guess what happened? He started all over, went to the top of the old list, and did it then in 4 cycles during the year. At the end of the year, he took inventory of himself. He rated himself on each of these items. And then he moved on to the next year. It never ended. Now, he did say that over every year or two, he would swap out some of these things because he felt like he was doing well in certain things. And so he'd swap it out to try to improve himself on other things. I started using this system back in 1980 when I first had my first team of salespeople. And this is the system that we use, not virtues, but skill sets for our job. And I wrote a book called The Power of Strategic Influence. Within that book, I came up with a list of 10 because for for that book, that was appropriate. For my new book, because the whole book is about mastery, I use the 13 concept, and we're talking about competencies. So since 2020, I've been surveying people around the world, leaders mostly, and asking them, what do you think are the competencies that a true leader needs to have to effectuate, some success and produce great results as a leader? And as you can imagine, every region, every industry, every country, you'll get some different types of responses of what it takes, what are the traits and the skill sets of a leader. And so the 13 we came up with were rankings. So I had a list of 40 competencies. These are the top 13. And so I have a system like Benjamin Franklin that says, if you want to improve yourself, you have to create a system of habit. Now I asked people, I said, what does it take to create a habit? How many days, how many weeks, how many months? Is there a formula out there that says if you do this over a certain amount of time, you'll create a habit? People always tell me, because there's some definition and there's some history about that question, and they'll say 21 days. And I'll say, do you really think that in 21 days that you can create a habit that's going to last you for life, like Benjamin Franklin? Do you really think that that first 13 weeks, he was doing not just days, but 13 weeks? And at the end of it, he felt like he had barely tapped the surface of what he needed to do to perfect himself in those particular virtues. So I'm just going to put it out there and say, okay, 21 days, it's enough time if you did it every day and you worked hard at it to actually create an understanding and help you know, hey, I can improve myself in these 21 days. And maybe now I have an understanding that'll help carry me forward. I'm here today to tell you that this is a lifelong habit. So Aristotle once again says what we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. That's Aristotle. So I'm going to jump into this because I want to show you the top 40 that came out of my study. Over 1,000 leaders around the world that I sent surveys to. This is what came back. The ones that are highlighted, that are bolded, are the top 13. But I've done something that Benjamin Franklin didn't do. I divided these competencies, he called them virtues, into what I call anchors. So my book is about the essential anchors of influential leadership. And so the first one is character, which goes right down the line with Benjamin Franklin. I've assigned 10 out of the list of the 40. They've all lined up almost magically when I did this. Character, there's 10, mindset, learning, innovation, and then influence. And so what I'm suggesting, if you use my system in my book, it'll teach you, choose 13. If you don't know what 13 to choose the top 13. And then you can substitute it, as Benjamin Franklin did, over time until you get to the right list that really fits you well in your industry, in your role, and your leadership. And so that's it. And we'll just continue. I also created a system that lets you to understand conceptually, this is my system, to know how you go about this. It's an evolution. It's a process. You can't do things unless there's a process to get the results you want. Anchor 1 is character. There's the top 3. You don't have to use those 3, but I'm using the top 13. Next is mindset. Next, after that, is innovation and learning. So some people call themselves lifelong learners. And that's an excellent category because there's 10 different aspects and competencies that can help you to become a expert learner and someone who believes and promotes and actually executes, again, as innovation. The last one is influence. And it's evolutionary. We start with our character. You can't go to mindset until your character is in place. When I'm on an airplane, the first thing they tell me as they're getting ready to take off is, if we have a problem in the air, the first thing you should do is take care of yourself. Grab the oxygen mask, put it on yourself so you can help other people. Don't attempt to do it without taking care of yourself first. That's what character is. You have to define who you are, how you can understand your capability, what motivates you, and what is your purpose in life. Once you have your character in place, it's mindset. Now I have the ability to think outside of my own character and think, what's my mindset in every situation I go into, with people, with my job, with a customer, etc. Well, after that, we say, okay, now I've got the right mindset. It's carrying me forward. It's helping me with my purpose to propel me. How do I execute against that to do something that's going to produce results I have to keep learning. I have to innovate. And finally, it's influence. When you've done all that, people are going to look at you as an expert. They're going to say, wow, you influence me because of what you do, but what you say and the things you carry with you. So this is just an example. If you did 1 week, you see there's 5. You rate yourself 1 to 5. The one thing Benjamin Franklin didn't do is have a rating system. I'm very process oriented. I've been doing this for decades with people. So I have people take the item they're going to work at, and at the end of the week, they rate it. Am I a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? 5 is very hard to get to, by the way. You should be very, very difficult on yourself. And start with a 1 or 2 and then progress at each cycle. So I just want to give you a flavor of how that works. Here's the system. Here's an 8-step process, starting with identifying the competencies you need to work on, finding your sources of light, which are your purpose and your motivation and the passion that they talked about. So it's on and on. It'll just show you the steps to get to where you need to go. At the end of a cycle, you stop, you assess, you revise, and redo. So as we heard the first quote, and also Aristotle, I wanted to bring up Malcolm Gladwell. So Malcolm Gladwell had a specific idea about how you can perfect yourself or master something. And perfection is a hard thing to even describe, so I'm going to take that off the table. Let's call it mastery. Let's call it potential. He said, for you, in order for you to hit your potential, it's not easy. You have to spend 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. But guess what? Not just any kind of practice, not just haphazardly, not just organically. It has to be done in the correct way. You may not know the correct way to begin with. You may learn part of it, but over time, you're going to understand the correct way. If you're a violinist, 10,000 hours later, you're going to be an expert violinist if you've done things in the correct way and become a world-class expert. Now, I'm here to tell you today that some people will learn faster. Some people will take longer. It might take 20,000 hours. But the fact of the matter is it takes a lot of time, deliberate practice, and trying to improve yourself along the journey. So I'm going to share with you 2 experiences of my own. In 1974, I was in high school, and I was into 3 sports. I was in wrestling, track, and football. We don't do soccer as much. Back then, we didn't do soccer. Now it's called football everywhere, but this is American football. I injured my back and couldn't continue with football, but I was still able to do wrestling and track. Well, my wrestling coach, who had never wrestled before, he worked really hard to teach us, couldn't give us the wherewithal of the expertise in wrestling. So he would tell us to go to things. So he called me up one morning and said, Gary, there's this great camp coming, and Dan Gable is going to be there, the world champion gold medalist. And so I made a decision on the spot that I was going to go to that. I was going to pay for it myself because it was not good timing for my parents. I've been saving money for 2 years to buy a motorcycle. But I decided to go to this camp because this man right here, Dan Gable, had just won the 1972 Olympics, I guess a couple of years before, not quite. And I was going to have the opportunity to be under his tutelage with a group of about 50 wrestlers. I got to the camp when the time came. My dad dropped me off. I went to the first exercise orientation, and the coach of the camp, Roderick, came to me and said, Gary, we'd like you to be the escort of Dan Gable. Can you imagine somebody saying that to someone who is your hero? I had no clue. I didn't have any friends there. My coach wasn't there. Who in the world inspired that guy to ask me to do this particular assignment? I was so happy, so excited. So when the time came, I ran, across campus. It was at the university. I met him. I recognized him. We didn't have the internet back then, by the way, in 1974. But we did have magazines. We did have television. And I recognized him instantly. I went up to him, introduced myself, Mr. Gable, I'm Gary Laney. So nice to meet you. I've been asked to come and help you be your escort, take you to your dormitory. And so I grabbed one of his bags off. We went across campus. For the next 40 minutes, very few people have an opportunity like I did. I don't even think I understood it at the time, to spend one-on-one time with a world champion, one of the best, the GOAT of wrestling, at least in his weight class. Dan Gable, to tell you how good he was, when he was in high school, he went undefeated, 64 matches. He never lost from his first match to his last match as a senior in high school. In college, same thing, national champion, until his last match of the national championship in his senior year. Something went wrong. He lost 13-7 to a guy named Larry Owens. everybody was freaked out because this wasn't supposed to happen. This guy had never lost a match. So Dan Gable went back to the basics and worked hard for the next 2 years to prepare for the Olympics, and went to the Olympics in Munich, and he did not get scored against. This is how good this guy was. He didn't get a single point scored against him in all the matches that he wrestled with the best of the best in the world. Now, this is the man I was about to meet. So here I am. I'm walking across campus with Dan, and in my mind, the youth showed up, and I felt so stupid after, but I asked him, I said, "Hey, Dan, I heard you lost a match one time." Why wouldn't I ask him anything? You know, tell me how you succeed. How did you have the mindset? Why didn't I do something to take advantage of that moment? I had to ask him the stupidest question in the world. Why did you lose? And the guy was forgiving. He said, "Gary, I had a bad day." And so I promised right then I would never, ever do something so stupid. I would be attentive. I'd be his best student for the week. And I went on to have a great week. I'll just tell you, before this camp, I was winning about half of my matches, maybe 2 out of 3 sometimes. I was not great. I was not an expert. I was good. I was physically fit, but I wasn't expert because my coach wasn't a wrestling coach. He never wrestled. Dan Gable, in 4 days, first of all, being his escort, 4 days of his tutelage, having the opportunity to go against him many times. He was the greatest defender of himself I've ever seen. This guy could counter anything. In 4 days, I was undefeated at that camp. During the next year, I went undefeated in high school and got a national ranking. It happened in a matter of 4 days. Imagine what could have happened if I had this guy for 4 years. So I never became, a world champion or anything, but it showed me that having access to expertise and then dedicating yourself with a serious attitude, like everybody I've quoted, is super, super important. This is me, my senior years when I was undefeated. So I had the physical, I didn't have the brain, but I put them together and it was an amazing experience. Quick, one more experience. How are we doing on time, by the way? I'm not doing very good. Can you tell me, Professor Patra, how much time do I have?
Quite good. We have our next speaker not until another 15 minutes. So you saw it.
So I'll wrap this up in 10.
Sure,
Okay,
please do.
so I want to tell you about mastery from language point of view, and then I'll tell you a little bit about business. So in 1976, I went to college for a year. I decided to stop what I was doing. I wanted to serve in a voluntary fashion before I got married, before I got too deep into my university career. And my church had a program where you could sign up as a service missionary, and they would approve you, hopefully, and then they would ship you somewhere around the world. My brother had done this. He did a stateside service mission, but I applied and I got approved to go to Spain. Now, I didn't speak any Spanish. I didn't speak a word of any language because in high school, they gave us an option to do vocational study versus language study, and I did the vocational electronics. So when I was called to Spain, I was so excited about it. I thought, wow, I don't speak any Spanish. And I think they speak a different kind of Spanish in Spain. So I went to a school that the church offered for 2 months. I came out. I've been taught by a guy from Argentina. I got to Spain. I didn't understand a single word. And I went for the first month trying to understand anything. I could say some things, but after a month, I really didn't feel like I was going to survive. After 3 months, I did survive, but I was really, really just a little bit competent. So I was able to, get around. I was speaking English a lot of the time with the people that spoke English. So I'm just going to tell you the bottom line. 6 months later, I struggled. I really worked hard at it. And I got to the point where I was okay. I was doing okay. I memorized things so I could say things decently. And I just made a decision that day. I said, I can't continue like this. I will never perfect or master this language. And I really need to, because I need to be free to express myself. And I couldn't the way I wanted to. So that day was a big deal for me in my life. I made a decision to stop speaking English. I had 18 months to go. It was a 2-year service mission. I decided that day to not speak another word of English unless I had to with an American or English person that didn't speak Spanish. That was a huge deal for me. I also had the opportunity to move in with a Spanish family where we only spoke Spanish. So I was really forced to have to speak it, live my language. And so over the next 6 months, folks, I transformed like I've never transformed before. I was living it. I was listening to it. I wouldn't allow myself to speak English. After the first year, I was feeling like I was pretty, conversational. And then I decided I'm going to continue this. The next 6 months, I became, I'm going to tell you, fluent. I may not have had the vocabulary of the most academic person, but I was fluent. I was able to express myself. And the last 6 months, I was free. I was able to, go out to talk to people, to express myself, to engage and focus on my message and my service and not my language. It's the most amazing experience of my life. So I decided after that experience, and before the first time I gave this this talk with this example, to step back and say, how many hours did I spend at this? Malcolm Gladwell says 10,000 hours. The first 6 months, I was speaking Spanish outside of my apartment, but not inside. And so 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, 26 weeks, 1,456 hours. I was not going to become an expert at that level in 2 years. The next 7 to 24 months, after the decision I made, it was 24/7. Every waking hour, I was speaking Spanish and working at it and becoming better at it and conversing with people. And it came out to 8,736 hours in those 18 months. Magically, I did not plan this, I'll tell you. Magically, it was 10,192 hours I got out of that. It's just a fluke, I'm sure. But the fact is, Malcolm Gladwell's formula worked for me. And I became a master of Spanish. Now, I don't speak Spanish as much as I should anymore, but what an amazing experience. When I came home, I got to give a speech in my church, and I had a Spanish accent. And my father, when he came to get me, my mother and father came to Spain. My dad didn't want us to travel by car because it was crazy driving around in Europe, he thought, even though I thought they were really good drivers. So we were getting on a bus one day. I was talking to this Spanish guy in front of me. We're having a conversation. At the end of my conversation, we're now boarding the bus. My dad said, "Hey, Gary," he said, what did that guy talk to you about? What did he ask you? I said, well, he wanted to know where I was from in Spain. He said, are you kidding me? He thinks you're Spanish. And it was the first time I really realized that I had mastered my language because I had the accent down, I had the language down, and it was an amazing revelation for me personally. So quickly, I'm just going to tell you, this is a house that I almost lost everything trying to build. It was an investment, and my family and I lived there for 7 years, but I had left my corporate job, went into an entrepreneurial setting, and then that didn't work out, and all of a sudden I had this house and this obligation and this loan. I'm going to tell you why I give you this experience, because I need to talk about business for a second. When I was about to get into financial ruin, my family had no idea. My wife's listening to this right now, and she might think, wow, were you really worried? Because I didn't know you were worried, but I was. I had to figure out how to carry on to build this house and to make money. I had 3 months to do it. The guy that I was in partnership, it fell apart, and I had to figure out, what do I do? So I had to step back and say, who am I? Right? The character of myself. Who am I? Mindset. Those first two anchors. How do I do this? And then I realized I've been working for corporate people for 25 years. They give me the keys. I go out, I get things done, I execute, and I've never let anybody down. Why would I let myself down? And so I decided to think about what competencies I had. I remembered growing up in my dad's business because I had become an entrepreneur in training. And I also started to network. And it was the first time in my life where I really took networking seriously. I started getting hold of my friends and my network, my influential sphere. And I got a hold of brokers and people who suggested businesses for me to look at. I didn't have a lot of money because I was taking it from a credit line. And so I ended up buying 7 tiny little businesses and decided I'm going to follow the money. I can't buy one because what if it doesn't work and I fail and I lose my house and my family is in trouble financially and my children in school. So 7 businesses, 3 of those were actually operating decently. I bought them for like anywhere between 10,000 and 25 or 50,000. Actually, I've spent 60,000 on one of them. 250,000 total for 7 businesses. 3 of them fell flat, didn't do well. Excuse me, 4 of them, and 3 of them went very well, turned into a multi-million-dollar business. We kept our house, and I was able to sell it later and pay it, and pay off all my debt and have a nest egg. So my point here is I learned something about myself. when things got tough. I think it's the time in your life where you learn the most when you're challenged with failure. And I learned that my superpower, if you want to know one thing I thought I was very, very good at, and I still am, is adaptability. I have others that I'm good at. And here's the list again. Here's some of the ones I think helped me get through this experience and not fail. Positivity, proactivity, strategic networking, which I mentioned. Experiential. I grew up in a family business. I'd spent 25 years in corporate. I knew what to do. I just had to believe in myself. Survival mindset was critical to me. And then finally, the one that really made the difference, adaptability. Working 7 different businesses, being able to pivot and move and be agile so that I could be successful no matter what I was doing. So folks, this is the list. You have the ability to stop and say, what on this list do I have the ability right now to use in my life and my work and become successful at and help other people? And maybe there's one thing on there that could become my expert competence and help me become a master. So here's the 13 top ones. I'm telling you, you go through these week by week, you know the formula already. At the end of one cycle, you start all over. That's the formula. And then I'm just going to tell you, mindset's critical. Steven Schellenberg, one of the greatest examples of networking that I've ever met, who used to surround himself with the best people and keep those relationships alive for years and years. I learned that from him. Next one is mindset. Gary Kennedy, who was a former, he actually was an endorsement on this book I just launched. He was the former president of Oracle, USA. And this guy, when he left Oracle, started taking, president, CEO jobs, board jobs. And he said, before he ever made a decision to take a job, he would always step back and ask himself, can I make a difference? If he didn't feel like he could, he wouldn't take it. Great example of integrity focused. And then I'll just go through this and just say, the last one is Nando Cesarone, who I have the privilege to interview for my book, but also for this webinar, or excuse me, this symposium that's coming up on April 5th. The greatest example I think I've ever met of somebody who is emotionally intelligent. During our interview, I said, what do you think your competency assets are? And he said, well, that I'm non-reactive. I don't react to good things happening or bad, because it allows me to think clearly, to assess the situation and do the best I can as a support to the person or the group that I'm talking to. Amazing guy. I could tell you about our experience together, but I'll leave that for the experience I have coming up. So I'm going to give you some parting words. Benjamin Franklin, even though he set the goal to master himself in 13 virtues, said at the end he fell short of it. Look what he said. He says, on the whole, though I never arrived at perfection, I had been so ambitious at obtaining, I fell short of it. Yet as I was, he said, this is 17, well, I have to add the years up, 80, 90 something. He was 84 years old, excuse me. He says, yet as I was by the endeavor, a better and happier man than I otherwise should have been had I not attempted it. He did not perfect himself, but look what he did over a lifetime. And some of those things he became expert at, but he was not going to claim expertise on everything. And my last parting thought, you should embrace the journey of leadership mastery. And I'm going to share with you one of my favorite poems, but this, we don't know we don't know the author, but here it is. And I'd like you to remember it. Maybe it helps set yourself up for the rest of this conference. Stick to your task till it sticks to you. Beginners are many, but enders are few. Honor, power, place, and praise will come in time to the one who stays. So stick to your task till it sticks to you. Bend at it, sweat at it, and smile at it too. For out of the bend, the sweat and the smile will come life's victories after a while. Thank you very much.